In this video, we're going to be rigging a human character by hand with the Create Joints tool here in Maya, and it's going to be used so that the bones we create match up exactly with the Unity Mecanum system. And our structure will look like this in Maya so that it's a perfect match for Mecanum. And when we look at the next video, we're going to look at creating the rig automatically with the Human IK system. Now, in the previous video, we got these buttons set up, so definitely go check out the rigging for Unity Part 1. The link to that's in the description, because that is, we're going to be using these tools that we covered in the last part. So the first thing I'm going to do is import a model, and this is just a base mesh mill. And so I'm going to open the MB, of course, that's the Maya binary file. So this file had Hypershade open. I'm going to close that and the UV editor. So here is the base mesh. And in a later tutorial, I'm going to cover basic modeling, but I'm not a 3D artist. So this mesh has 3 meshes I can see, a faceless and one with shoes. So I'm going to start off by just deleting these 2. And I don't want to modify the source file, so I'm going to save this as a new scene. So now the only thing here is the mesh of this character. Now, we've already covered the root node and creating joints in a previous video. Now we're going to do that to create the human's joint. The first thing I'm going to do is create the locator. And this is the root node that's going to be at 0, 0, 0, right down here in the middle between the player's feet. We need that. And after that, the next joint we create is going to be the hip. But before I do that, I want to switch over to this image. And this image is included, I put a link to it in the description, and what it's showing you is the structure in Maya and how all the bones look and how all the bones are named. And then it shows the corresponding bones in Unity's Mecanum system. So we want to make our guy look like this. So for a reference, I know I got my locator that's a root, and after that is the hips, and then we got a spine, chest, neck, head. And you can have more and just assign, but I'm going to be creating 1 joint per what's required in Unity. So looking at Unity, starting with the hips, we have a hips, spine, chest, neck, and head. So to make the player's complete center spine is 5 joints. Hips, spine, chest, neck, head. So that's what we're going to create first. Now the outliner's open here. If it's not, you can say window outliner and it will open that up. You could even come dock it over here. But I already have mine open. But I also want to click on the Create Joints tool, and I want to get to these tool options. So to get to that, I'm going to double click on the Create Joints tool. The other way you could do that is click this button that says, well, it's supposed to say Show or Hide Modeling Toolkit. Wait, that's not it. Show or Hide Tool Settings. Here we go. That's the window that I want to open. I can double click to get that open. And I might want to have that docked down here. And that probably is easier said than done. So for the time being, I'm just going to let it, I guess I'll just let it hover here. There is kind of, I just can't, if you know how, let me know in the comment. But what I could do is I could dock this here. But then my outliner gets pushed over. Yeah, I don't know the best way to get this UI set up for rigging. You could try the rigging. Here we go. Rigging, because rigging has... Now I need to close this, so let me tear off And then this thing opens up. I don't know why it does that. On the rigging, I think we have it what we're looking for here. We got the tool settings here. I got my outliner here. That's what seems to work the best for me. So I guess this will work what we got with the rigging. We got the outliner, the tool settings, and so here we go. I'm going to select the root and select the joint tool, and this is what we're going to look at. First of all, before we go start creating joints, let's look at the settings. First of all, you got degrees of freedom, and this is what axis the joint is allowed to rotate around. All the joints we're going to be using for this are going to have full degrees of freedom, but maybe for a mechanical thing like say a lever, you might only give a lever 1 degrees of freedom so that it only can move. And then there's symmetry. Now symmetry we're going to use later because we're going to put symmetry on the x-axis when we create, for example, the arm, because that's going to create if I create a joint here, it's going to create a joint over here. For the spine, we want to turn that off. And then we're going to just keep these as they are, but projective centering, we're going to turn that on, because what that's going to do is it's going to create the joint right in the middle of what we're clicking on. So watch this. I'm going to click here to create a joint. All right, see, it created the joint way back here behind. Now I'm going to turn on projected centering, and I'm going to click here. And we can't see anything, so we have to go to shading, X-ray joints. And we can see now that the joint is inside of the body, because what it did is it, based on where I clicked at, it knew I clicked on a mesh, so it tries to put the joint right in the middle of wherever you click on. So I'm going to turn this on while we're building the mesh. Now I want to go directly to the right view, so I'm going to click this, or you can hit, I believe, the space bar, but I see my window's small, so I'm going to drag this out. So the space bar is opening up these two windows. And I'm going to press spacebar in this one. So spacebar in this one should show me both, or all 4 in the regular view, but I guess rigging only has 2. And spacebar here will get me back into perspective. So I want to go into the side view, and here I'll turn my shading back on, and I'll have to go to shading X-ray joints. And we want to create 3 joints here: hips, spine, chest, neck, head. And for the placement of those joints, let's look at a picture of the spine. And remember that Unity has 1, 2, 3 joints for the body area of the body. And so in this area we've got 3 joints, and actually 4 if we include the neck. This is the position of where they should be. The hips joint should be here, where there's no movement at all, and this is your pelvis, or your hips position, where there's going to be no movement. If anything, there will be a little rotation on the y axis. And the next joint is the lumbar, and the lumbar represents bending in the spine in this direction. So of course your back can bend in this direction down here. This is the first joint, this one, which is called spine. So this spine joint corresponds to the lumbar region of the back that bends in this direction. The next major bend in our spine is the thoracic region, and the thoracic region bends in the opposite direction that the lumbar does. And we'll talk about joint orientation later, but if you see a different orientation between the lumbar and the thoracic, then that's okay, because those joints bend in opposite directions. So this is the chest. Unity calls that one, which is right here, the chest. And the chest bone should go about in the middle of the thoracic region, and that joint is going to represent the bend that's happening in this direction. After that, we have the cervical, and this is the neck bone in unity. So here we go. You got to go over here into the head, and that is the neck. So the neck is the cervical, and of course, the cervical can bend in both directions pretty well. It can bend both this way and this way pretty well. But if you really look at a correct posture, the lumbar is bending in this direction, the thoracic is bending in this direction, and the cervical is bending again back in this an opposite direction. More of the same curve that the lumbar has. And the final joint is the head joint. And let's look at the positioning of the head joint. Here is a human skull. And I like to position the head joint where unity is showing it, which is right here. And what that position is at all the way at the top of the spine. There's an area that's basically right below or right in front of the ear, which is right here, and that's where your jaw rotates. Now, there may be a separate bone added for the jawbone. We're not going to cover that in this tutorial. You'll see here that the jawbone is a separate bone, and that is a bone that would come off of the head bone. But in this tutorial, we're just going to be making the head bone, and that goes in this position right here and represents the rotation, or more or less where the skull connects to the jaw. And you can see that this is going to be the position of the head bone. So that covers the positioning of the 5 bones. Let's go back into Maya and place these down. I've already created joint 1. Let me just delete that and start over. I have my projected centering turned on. And I know that the hips bone is going to represent the below the lumbar, so I'm not going to put it in this area. That's for the spine bone. But the hips bone should be essentially between the belly button and the crotch area. So I'm going to look at this area that's protruding, extruding right here, whatever the right word is, and I'm going to put it right towards the middle of that, and we'll click right here. Now, if I were to go back into the perspective, it's not going to be perfectly centered. I could see that there's a value of 2 on the Z, but that's okay for now because projected centering is deciding where to put it, and we'll adjust it later. The next bone is the spine bone, and that is for this bend in the back. And we're gonna put it. I like the bones to be a little bit more towards the back, where the actual spine is in the body. But at the same time, because of weight painting on the joints, you kind of want it to be a little bit centered. So it's going to be a mix of getting it in the exact location where the spine is, and a little bit towards the middle, so that the full mesh deforms correctly. But this will be the location. It's a pretty short distance between the hips and the spine. And the next one is the chest. And this is the longest joint. This is, of course, if we look back, here we go. This is going to be the longest area between here and all the way up to here. And I can see that that looks like it's about at the armpit or the pectoral area. And of course it would be representing the middle of this bend in the back. So if I look at the middle of this bend in the back, I could see that, yeah, it's going to be pretty much under the armpit, maybe a little bit above the pectoral. I'm going to go ahead and choose right here for that bone. The next bone up is the neck, and that is going to be right about here, really right in the middle of the neck, maybe a little bit towards the back. And after that, we've got the head bone. So I'm going to follow the jaw line, and then I'm going to come up. And really about right here is where I'm guessing that position would be. I don't want too steep of an angle right here, so I might push it back a little bit about here. So I've got the spine laid out, and looking at it, we've got our 5 joints, but I kind of want to move this joint number 3 back a little bit. So I pressed W on the keyboard to switch to the move tool. And of course that's going to mess up the position of the neck and the head. So I think that looks a little bit better. And I'm going to go to the front view now. And the spine looks pretty good. And I want these joints to be perfectly centered. So going down from joint 1, I need to, first of all, I want to middle click on the mouse to drag this onto the root. And that makes it a child of it. So now looking at joint 1, I can see that there is a Y value of 110. And the rest of them just have an X value. So we can know that the orientation of this joint is sending X up. And if we go to the Comet Joint Orient that we set up on the last Maya tutorial, and we select all of these joints and show the axis, we could see what that is doing. So I can see that the first 2 joints got the Y going forward, the Z going this way, X going up. But then getting up here, it switches the other way. This bone's that way. And then it looks like the head is completely different where the Y is going up. I want the orientation on all the joints in the spine to be the same. And that'll make sure that if I ever were to select everything here on the spine and go into rotation, see if I rotate it, the spine is doing kind of some funny movements. And so what I'm going to do is, with the Comet Joint Orient tool, what we're going to do is we're going to set the aim axis to X, the up axis to Y, and we're going to set the world up to Z. And with the 5 joints in the spine up to the head selected, we're going to hit Orient Joints. Okay, now we have all of them with the Y forward, Z going right, X going up. And if I were to select all these joints and try this rotation again, I could see that it's rotating as I would expect the spine to with that control. So My rotation tool has a step set to absolute. I'm going to turn that off and do this again. You can see the spine now bends nicely. Alright, so the spine is, the orientations are set up. Now we can set the positions. Joint 1 is coming off of the root, and this is the hips. And we could reference the name: hips, spine, chest, neck, head. And the hips joint has a translate Z of 2. And that's probably okay, because if I press 0 on this one, it's just going to move it back. I guess for the hips, I will put it at a translate Z of 0. But that means the rest of the bones need to get adjusted a little bit. So I'm going to press W and move them forward. That doesn't work as good as rotation. Let me go to the spine bone and rotate that. And for this, I want to be in the side view. And that's probably good. So we have the hips have a translate Z of 0. The spine is a translate X, which is a difference in actually the Y value, the height. The chest, again, just a difference of the height. Difference of the height, everything's zeroed out. Difference of height and everything's zeroed out. Now, if you're being picky, you could get rid of the small decimal points here, I guess. But it's this is just being really picky, I guess, and actually is probably is absolutely not important at all. All right, we got the spine set up. Because I moved them, let me just look again. I think the position of those joints is fine. Now, if you want to, you can see the ball of this joint is small. That doesn't affect the bones or how that works in the game or how the animate. It doesn't affect anything. It's just a visual. But if you did want that visual to be bigger, you could select the hips and adjust the radius. So I'll set the radius of the hips to something like 3 or maybe 2. That way it's just a little bit bigger, easier to see, and the hips isn't such a small looking joint. All right, we have finished the spine. In the next video, we're going to make the legs, and then we're going to get into the arms and the fingers.